Call this meeting to order, the House Higher Education Budget Committee. And welcome, everybody. Do we have any housekeeping things, Shirley, that we need to take care of? Okay, then committee, we have the wonderful privilege of having the Chancellor KU with us, Doug Gerard. We will start with that, and then I think you're going to introduce a few other folks too. So thank you. Welcome to committee.
Thank you, Shirley. And yeah, if it's all right, I would like to give a quick overview here, and then introduce you all to some of our just outstanding faculty members to talk a little bit about what we're doing to serve the state and the region, and demonstrate some of the really remarkable work that's happening at the University of Kansas. And we have slides handed out. Does everybody have their handouts? Okay, great. Just want to make sure. So what I'd like to do today is really cover a little bit about our mission, our vision. I'd like to talk a little bit about national enrollment trends just to set a stage. And these enrollment trends will be true for any of our sister institutions. So I think there's some value in doing that. And then I'd like to get into a little bit more about how the university is plugging into the economy of the state of Kansas and a lot of the work that we do to support infrastructure-wise what happens in our state and our region. From slide 3, from a mission perspective, we really view ourselves as being responsible for really educating the leaders of tomorrow, for helping to build healthy and vibrant communities, and then to make discoveries that change the world through our research enterprise. If you look at slide 4, it really starts to get to talking about national trends in higher education. And what this slide is really showing is the number of high school graduates in the United States projected from 2019 through 2037. So a 20-year period. And if you look at this map, what you really see is anything in blue is going to be shrinking in terms of the number of high school graduates. And we know that that's already happening. We know that we have 1 million fewer students in higher education today than we did 10 years ago. So this trend has already been going on for some time, and it certainly is going to accelerate over the next 15 years or so. And we're certainly starting to feel that impact already across the Midwest. If you look at slide 5, it's really the enrollment trends for KU are really actually remarkably flat for the most part over the last 12 years. We certainly saw a dip in 2020, about a 3% dip in our enrollment, and that was about 7.5% was freshman class, a drop of freshman class, and the other big dip was in international students. I'm happy to say that we've rebounded back to our pre-pandemic enrollment levels in the freshman class. But of course, that smaller class from last year will stay with us for 4 years from an overall headcount perspective. And unique to KU within the state is that we are 41% non-resident in our freshman class. And I say that's unique to us because of the size of that out-of-state student body. And then having said that, we are also the #1 choice for high school students in the state of Kansas. And so we continue to push very hard on recruitment there as well. And that freshman class continues to be one of the most academically talented and most diverse class that we've had really in the history of the university. But if you look at the next slide on 6, you really see where our students come from. And so really our students come from all 50 states and 100 countries. And what's also unique, we've had a big effort over the last 5 years or so to work on connecting our students with employers in the region, and both in-state and out-of-state students. And we've seen an increase in the number of out-of-state students that are staying here when they graduate. So 5 years ago, that was about 25% of our out-of-state students would stay in Kansas when they graduated. That number in 2020 was up to 40%. So that was 1,100 students that came to KU from some other state and decided to stay in Kansas to work once they graduated. So we're able to really import that talent pretty effectively, and we continue to work on that. If you look at slide 7, we really have diversified our relationships. We have over 3,000 companies that we have some kind of a relationship with, and a lot of that relation is driven by them wanting to connect to our workforce, our students as they graduate. We graduate about 7,200 degrees every single year. I mentioned 40% of those are out of state. Of the out of state are staying with us, and a lot of it is due to this connectivity with industry. We also have pushed hard on getting our research moving out of the lab and into companies. We have 44 active startup companies at this point. And we also have worked very closely with our chambers, with our development councils to attract companies. And we've attracted over 30 companies to our region to work with us. Again, some of that's to work with our research, but a lot of it's actually to work with our students. And that continues to grow. On slide 8, you see a rendering of our Rku Innovation Park, what we hope it'll look like in about 10 years. We're currently on phase 3 of building out that park, and that third phase will allow us to attract 12 more companies to the Lawrence Douglas County area. And that building is almost full at this point, although it won't finish for many more months yet. That Innovation Park success has really attracted over 30 companies, and there are currently 380 jobs on the Innovation Park, which has been very effective, but really driven by our research engine. And we now having increased every year for the last 6 years, over $400 million a year of research activity. And that comes, most of it, from outside the state of Kansas. Comes into Kansas for us to conduct that research. That research enterprise employs over 4,000 people in the state, just from the research dollars. And we spend about $50 million a year with Kansas vendors in 65 different counties to fuel that research enterprise. We also work with our alumni base, a lot of which is not in the state of Kansas. 40% of our donors through KU Endowment do not live in Kansas. They live somewhere else around the world. We also help drive the economy through events of various types, whether it's basketball games, football games, or any of the other activities that happen at the university. Going to slide 9, really when we look at the healthcare for the state of Kansas, and we're going to hear a little bit more about that from Dr. Mosier here today, but over half of the physicians in the state of Kansas graduated from KU, and that's an extraordinarily high percentage for most states in the country. And our part of that is our presence across the state with a campus in Kansas City, a campus in Wichita, and a campus in Salina. And those relationships of those campuses with our communities, it really helps drive that. Our School of Nursing is out across the state, has a relationship with 8 community colleges to allow nursing students at community colleges to stay there and finish their bachelor's degree without ever leaving their community. So they can continue working in their local hospitals, but get that bachelor's degree in nursing, which is so preferred, frankly, by most of the hospitals at this point in time. The KU health system continues its reach across the state, certainly currently serves all 105 counties in Kansas, 98% of the counties in Missouri, all 50 states and 30 countries with healthcare. And continues to do that both through Kansas City, but also Great Bend and Topeka. And the School of Medicine has area health education centers currently located in Kansas City, but also in Hayes and Pittsburgh. And that really delivers continuing education to the healthcare workforce out across the state. And our Center for Telemedicine certainly took off through the pandemic as we shifted almost everything to remote for a short period of time of about 6 or 8 weeks. And those have been lasting relationships that really continue. If you look at slide 10, we talk a little bit more about sort of the other things that we do for the state that probably a lot of people are not aware of. The Kansas Law Enforcement Training Center is part of KU, and we train 8,000 police officers every year. That's down in Yoder, Kansas. Our Kansas Fire and Rescue Training Institute trains over 8,000 firefighters, mostly volunteer firefighters and EMTs across the state. And that's really a mobile institute. It's based out of Lawrence, but they're on the road all the time doing that training. The Kansas Geological Survey is critical to monitoring water in the state. We monitor the water levels in 1,400 different wells across the state, but they do so much more than that to really help our state. The School of Business created the Red Tire program a few years ago. That's a program that students run, but it helps business owners in small communities in Kansas find a buyer for their business when they're ready to retire. And in most of those communities, if they don't find a buyer, that business closes. So they've saved 76 businesses through that process already, and that continues on. Recently learned from a colleague in Missouri, actually, that they've saved 28 dental practices in the state by finding a buyer and a dentist to go out and take over that practice. We certainly are present in all the hospitals, all the pharmacies across the state, and actually probably most city managers in the state of Kansas came through our program, which is ranked #1 in the country. I want to spend just a few minutes talking about Kansas athletics because I get this question a lot, and to maybe clarify a few things. One is we're blessed that we have an athletics department that's one of about 5% in the United States that is self-funded, meaning they can generate enough revenue that they really support their own operations. But they do much more than supporting their own operations. They actually pass about $20 million a year back to the university in the form of tuition, housing, dining, and other services that the university provides to the athletics department and those student athletes. And so it's really such a critical part of our infrastructure, but it's also a critical part of our ability to recruit 41% students from out of the state of Kansas, because that's our national brand, and that's our brand that's on television each and every day. That KU Kentucky game that had an unfortunate outcome had the second highest viewership in ESPN game day history at 2.2 million people. And you just can't buy that kind of marketing. So really, we know that our athletics brands, and I know the K-State folks would say the same thing about their athletics department, it really is a critical part of their brand and our connectivity to our donors around the world as well. And certainly no shortage of challenges coming through collegiate athletics as well. We could spend the rest of the day talking about that, but that's probably not why we're here. If you go to slide 12, it really shows our history, and this is reflected across the system, but these are KU numbers. And we really hit a high water mark in state funding in 2008, and we're about $13 million below that number today. And if you look at that red line, that's a CPI adjusted number based off of that 2008 number. So just adjusting for inflation, we're down about almost $100 million in annual funding from where we were in 2008. Yeah, so really a pretty significant challenge there. And of course, inflation continues to impact us all, which is why we certainly are supportive of the governor's proposed budget for this year. And if you think about, and I'll show you our revenue streams, but between tuition and state appropriations, that's a big chunk of what we run the university off of. And as shown in 13, we've held tuition flat at KU for the last 3 years in a row, and actually almost flat, completely flat for 6 years in a row. And that was intentional. That was part of it because we were, in 2017, we were the most expensive public university in the Big 12. Not by a lot, but we were. We now are the third most expensive in the Big 12, and that was quite intentional on our part to remain competitive in our marketplace. But certainly doing that suppresses revenue. Obviously, challenges with state funding and inflation does that as well. And so if you look at slide 14, you can see that state appropriations now make up 17% of our budget, and tuition makes up 22% of our budget. And then the rest comes from other sources, both research and including our guests from KU Endowment. So it's really forced us to be really conscious in our stewardship of our resources, including our state resources. And if you look back historically, we've had a cut of some form on our campus in Lawrence 12 of the last 15 years. Including current year, we did a $25 million reduction in our base budget to be able to balance and meet the rising costs given our revenue streams. And that has translated also to a significant attrition in faculty. We're down 11% in faculty numbers from where we were 10 years ago. But we really are not just trying to be the best stewards of the current resources we have. We're looking to where we can diversify and generate perhaps additional revenues, be it through working with the community to run conferences, whether it's industry partnerships, working closely with endowment for fundraising, and really focusing on our efficiencies and our ability to try and streamline our operations, which we've done a lot of over the last 12 years, but we always have opportunity there as well. So really a lot of activity going on to adjust us where we are, but we know the future looks challenging. We're looking at 7% inflation like everybody else is right now. And we're looking at workforce challenges just like everybody else is right now. And so we know that this coming year is going to be a challenging one for us. As I mentioned, we believe the governor's budget would go a long ways to help us address some of those challenges going forward. Madam Chair, with that, I would take some questions, or we can take questions at the end. What's your preference?
I think I would like to ask questions on this portion
Sure.
so far, and then go on to the next section.
Absolutely.
Okay, committee, anyone questions? Yes, Representative Nguyen.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and hello.
Good to see you.
Wow. I guess I'll say it's related to your chart on page 13. There is conversation, I'll say, aka bill proposed to eliminate out-of-state tuition. In your opinion, what would be the potential impact? And then what data would you base your opinion on?
Excellent question. And the data is the data, which is our data. I can't give you the impact for the state. I can give you the impact for our university.
I'm talking.
Yeah, for the University of Kansas, again, going back to the fact that we're 41% out of state on our campus, it'd be about $55 million a year of lost revenue if we did that. So that would be, we would be insolvent.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Sorry, Representative Riley.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So your $55 million, is that if all the outstate people went away, or is that the difference between the outstate tuition down to the in-state tuition?
It's the latter. It's the differential tuition cost. So that's assuming they still came, but they were paying in-state instead of, most of them don't pay full outstate, just to be clear. We have relationships, for example, the Midwest Compact, we share with 13 states that if one of our students goes there, they get in-state plus 50%. We do the same for those. So we get a lot of students in through that program. So they're not paying full out of state. And then we have some waiver programs for very high achieving students to attract them, and they can be at anywhere from in-state to 150% of in-state. But that 55 million number is if we had everybody here today and they just paid in-state instead of what they're paying now, that would be $55 million.
Representative Rajas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chancellor, good to see you.
Good to see you again.
First off, thank you for your leadership. I know the last year, especially probably 2 years, has been tough. You've taken a lot of hits, but you know,
Still standing.
well, but you led by making cuts and not blaming everybody else. You just took it, you know, and looks like hopefully we'll go through it. So I just wanted to kind of publicly make sure it's on the record that I appreciate your leadership in that. I wish that others would have followed, but I'll hear about it out the hallway now because they just said that. But everybody's done a good job. But anyway, I just want to make sure that you know some of us were aware of that. When you break down, and I'm looking at 14, number 14, but you could probably do it. The breakdown of research dollars, how much research dollars are coming into KU. We've talked about tuition and state aid, but I think as we look at, of course, the big three, we're really looking at that research amount. And so how much is that of the budget?
The research dollars come in a couple different forms. There's a big chunk is federal research funding from the big agencies, the NIH, the NSF, Department of Energy, Department of Defense. And then we do, coming through that same pathway is a combination of industry relationships. And so industry funded research, and you'll hear a little bit about that from Dr. Shiflett today. But then there's also coming through a research enterprise or contracts and services. And I'll give an example of that is our Academic Assessment Institute, Neil Kingston runs, does all of the academic assessment, K through 12 assessment for 35 different states. And that all runs through our research enterprise. And that's kind of a combination. There is research as part of that, but it's also a service that's being provided to the state. And so it's a combination of all that that totals up to $400 million in research expenditures every year.
Just trying to, as we talked to Wichita State on Friday, and we'll ask this, of course, tomorrow from K-State. So as we look at housing and some of those other kind of revenues that are generated beyond the fees, now, would that be under sales and service as well? Is that how you would?
Largely under the auxiliaries. Those are defined as auxiliaries for us. So that 11% there is housing, dining, parking are the big ones for that. And the student unions. Those are really the four big revenue ones that make up that 11% piece. And again, just by KBOR policy, our auxiliaries need to be freestanding, meaning they do not get tuition support. They have to stand on their own 2 feet. So fortunately, we had some federal funds to help them stand on their own 2 feet through the last 2 years, to your point.
Madam Chair, I have one more. I'm sorry. Since we really haven't had a chance to ask, and this may be kind of out in left field, but let's talk about the proposed or the new members of the Big 12. And let's get beyond academics. Athletics. Let's go to the academics. Focus on those institutions that will be joining the Big 12. What does that mean academically?
Sure. I think that's an excellent question. They run a bit of a spectrum. And certainly Cincinnati's profile looks very similar to ours academically and from a research portfolio perspective. Central Florida and Houston are both huge institutions, enrollments of 70,000+ students, and have Central Florida's research portfolio is very rapidly growing. And then BYU has a strong engineering infrastructure. It's a much more focused campus. And does very well in those fields. So I think they line up well for us academically, and I think, and then obviously just from a population base and a market base, they bring something new to the Big 12 for us. Great question. If in response to actually your first question, Madam Chair, if I could, I'd like to introduce Jeff Dewett, who is my Chief Financial Officer and who has helped us get to this point through this pandemic. Where are you, Jeff?
Welcome to committee. We're glad you're here. I have a few questions. You may be the one to answer.
He may be. And I just want to let you know, he joined us, has it been a year ago now? A year ago, March. It will be a year in March. He was previously the Chief Financial Officer for the District of Columbia, or Washington, D.C. And before that, for the city of Phoenix. And he was working in Phoenix in that role in 2008 when everything exciting happened there. But really, he's done an outstanding job in both those communities, driving them to economic viability, and has just hit the ground running for us. So you're right, he may be the one who's going to answer some of your questions.
Okay, Representative Amix.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Chancellor. It's always good to see you.
Great to see you.
Even though we're probably neighbors, don't get to see you enough. And just to tag along with a colleague across the way over there, I appreciate all the hard work that you and your entire staff has done as a representative of the city of Lawrence in making sure that the university is a great success, because a lot of us small business people really rely on it. But to go along with the self-imposed cuts that you all have brought on and the 11% reduction in faculty, how is that pool of candidates? We got a great faculty at the University of Kansas, and are we able to still attract the kind of individuals to teach that we need to be at, and is that pool there? So
you're absolutely right. We have a superb faculty, and you're going to hear from a couple of world-class ones here today. And that's certainly more competitive, and our salaries are challenging for us, both in recruitment and retention, and we've got some work that we've got to do there to be competitive. And I would say most of the reduction that we saw in faculty, the vast majority of that really was through retirements. We did 2 voluntary separation projects through the course of the last 3 or 4 years, and then not hiring back in except very selectively so. And that's how we've managed, for the most part, that reduction. We haven't laid anybody off. We haven't had to do anything like that. It's been sort of natural attrition, and then being very strategic about how we brought people back. As we are in the rehiring mode, we certainly are focusing on our research faculty. We are proud members of what's called the Association of American Universities, the AU. It's the top 65 research universities in North America. We've been a proud member of that since 1909, but that is not a given membership. That is based on your research productivity and your research portfolio almost exclusively. And so we've had to really focus on that with an eye towards making sure we stay with the best and the brightest in the country. And KU Endowment's been a huge partner in that for us.
The governor's recommendation helps us stay at that point, right? Helps us move ahead.
It most certainly helps us move ahead. You know, it's in a couple elements of it are key. One element of it was including us in the pay raise for state employees. That's really important. You do need to recognize when you look at the pie chart that covers the 17% part, and we're responsible for covering the rest of it. But it's a huge help trying to get competitive in the salary range for everybody, not just our faculty. And then be able to meet the rising costs and hold tuition flat once again, which is unheard of. Actually, probably never happened in our history. But we will have had students that will be graduating and have never seen a tuition increase. And that's pretty cool when you think about it from an affordability and a debt perspective. So yeah, it would go a long ways to get us where we need to go. And the other elements in there, whether it's the IT, deferred maintenance, need-based aid, all those critical for us.
Representative Wassinger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excuse me. Which really concerns me is looking at the national enrollment trends. And it seems like, and I'm not just picking on you, sir, thank you for being here. It seems like we're being asked for more money when the enrollment trends are going down. What would you say to us about
that? No, thank you. I appreciate that. And a couple thoughts. So one is, first of all, we've done pretty well. Our enrollment's really flat, with the exception of the pandemic. But our costs do continue to go up, whether we like it or not. That's just a part of reality. And what you see when you look at that map and you know what unemployment is right now, that's only going to get worse. And so what we need to be able to do as a state is to attract talent to the state, because it's clearly not going to occur. It's not going to occur here naturally if you believe these trends. And so I believe your higher ed institutions are probably the most successful way you have to attract that talent to a state, and then to be able to keep your companies here so you can provide the workforce for them. I think if we start trending the opposite direction, that will be a trend that will go on for 15 years, and the state will look very different.
I mean, one more. The committee will probably be tired of hearing me ask this question, but how much time and money are you spending on getting high school students that are freshmen ready to be college students?
Well, I'm not sure exactly what you're getting at there. Obviously, we have an admission standards process. As I said, our freshman class this year is the most academically highest GPA we've had in history. Very talented kids. And we made a conscious decision probably 7 or 8 years ago that we would be very intentional about who we admitted with an intent to graduate everybody who came. And we knew statistically certain students who did not perform very well in high school or on exams failed at a very high rate at our institution. So our first thing was and we felt that was doing them an injustice. And so the first thing we did was somewhat limit a little bit more who we took in through that process. And then over the last couple of years have been building out our student success program so that as we start to welcome more of those students who maybe didn't perform quite as well at high school, we have enough resources around them with tutoring and academic support that they can be successful in our environment. But we knew we needed to do something different because they were not being particularly successful. So that doesn't help very much on before they show up, which maybe is the question you're asking. So part of what we've tried to do there, and we now are working with 3 different community colleges and 5 different school districts, is working on our program in 3, which is, or a degree in 3, which Dave Cook's here somewhere. He created that one for us. But that's really a year of college and high school. That's a year at your community college, and then that's 2 years with us to finish your degree. So really you can get your undergraduate in 3, but probably maybe more importantly is it's that year in high school and that year in community college that gets them ready for when they show up to us. Sure. Correct. Absolutely, and happy to do that. Appreciate the question.
We have a few more questions. Representative Fairchild.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As far as the budget request for the agency and the government or governor recommendations, you know, the number that we have isn't necessarily what you're going to be getting, even if we approve that, because the Board of Regents has a separate request and they're recommending or wanting, you know, a very significant increase in funding. And so isn't it the case that you may end up getting quite a bit more money in addition to what it shows here from the Board of Regents if we approve what the Board of Regents wants as far as their funding?
Help me on that one, guys. I'm not sure what, Kelly, if you don't mind. Yes.
Kelly Witten, University of Kansas. Shirley, do you want to explain this more? I mean, it's much more.
I think what he's talking about is the difference between KU's base budget and the flow through money through the Board of Regents, which will be added to your budget, which will show up next year when you come back in 45 plus probably the state, some of the scholarship money, the one-time money, the IT money, that'll all flow into your budget after 2023 starts, but you don't know how much that is.
You're correct. In addition to what's defined for the universities, there are those one-time asks that the regents have put together collectively for the institution. So we would hope that some percentage of that would find its way to us.
Representative Woodard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chancellor, always good to see you. Thanks for being here. The Vice Chair's comments made me think, maybe I'm putting you on the spot, so if you don't have an answer today, totally fine. But with the enactment of the Kansas Promise Scholarship Act last year, part of that is that we want those students to go to the 2-year programs and then stay in Kansas or transfer to a 4-year university. So would love to know what the different academic units, nursing comes to mind right away, for how they're going to look at recruiting those students from those graduating associate degree programs into the 4-year programs at KU and all the universities in the state.
Yeah, there's a couple initiatives that are going on at the Board of Regents level right now, in which our provost is very active in. One is continuing to grow those articulation agreements between community colleges and the 4 years to make it easy to transfer everything through, and then actually creating degree maps so you know what you're transferring and into what degree and what you're going to get credit for, just making that much easier than it is a big part of it. And the other collaborative efforts to really do joint work together, like the School of Nursing is doing, to say state or community college will help you get your bachelor's degree. I think it's going to have to be all those, right, to really make it easier for our students to transfer between institutions and not have to redo credits. That's the big thing, not have to redo credits. We did a pilot this year or last year with Johnson County Community College and our Edwards campus to allow them to transfer more credit hours from the community college to the university. It didn't change what they had to do for their degree, but we had students that were losing up to 12 or 15 credit hours in the transfer process that we thought probably was not right. And that pilot program actually proved very successful.
Fantastic. I'm excited. I think the Promise Scholarship is going to make a huge impact in getting students that are otherwise not going into post-secondary education after graduating. I think it's only about half of Kansas high school graduates go into the system.
Correct.
So I'm hoping this will not only get them into the pipeline, but also lead to more enrollment at our universities as well. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Nguyen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just need some clarification. Going back to this developmental cost of developmental courses. At your university, are only freshmen allowed to take these developmental courses, or are upperclassmen also allowed?
I'm sorry, which developmental courses?
Whichever one you're speaking of that prepare them, if I'm, based on the Vice Chairman's question, when the freshman enrolls, they may not be able to
resources.
pass.
Yeah. No, any student
Adele.
has access to those. Yes. Any student has
Any
access
student.
to
So
those.
it's not always that true freshman.
Correct. Correct. Transfer students actually often fall into the same bucket. Although, quite honestly, when we look at our statistics, transfer students do quite well, and probably they're a little more mature when they hit the ground at our university, and they've kind of figured it out a little bit. But those resources are available to all.
It's a mixed population.
Yes, yes, ma'am, absolutely. And we're seeing that mixed population is growing, of course. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I do have just a couple of questions also. First, I love graphs. Thank you for the graphs. I really appreciate it. One history question. What happened in 2008 that you had such a surge in funding in that, on your graph on page 12?
Yeah.
It seems like the high point.
It definitely was a high point, and it was a commitment by the governor, who was Sebelius at that point, and the legislature to try and grow higher education. And so they started putting more money into our institutions collectively, not just KU. And then obviously the recession of 2008 hit, and kind of everything changed. And so not surprisingly, we had a course correction there.
Yeah. Okay, and of course that affects your red line, just, and the difference when you pick the highest funding year. So
Sure, you could pick 2009 and it would be 75 million instead of 100 million.
okay, that's good to know. I appreciate you.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah. Okay. So, and then I love the graph on page 14, the pie graph. So there's a couple things I would love to see. I would like to understand how history plays a part in this. So this would have been like maybe 2021,
Yeah.
Okay. And so do you think you could put together a pie graph that was back to 2002, which is where you first started your graph on page 12, and then, maybe 2008 or 2015, just a few pie graphs so we could understand how this has changed over the years?
That same pie graph, but just at different years along.
Yeah, that would be super helpful.
Absolutely.
Okay. And then what is your tuition now? I know we've gotten it, but I'm just kind of adding it in on your packet.
So our tuition and fees for a full year is roughly $11,000. That does not include for a year. So it's two semesters. So it's about $5,700 per semester.
Okay.
And that does not include room and board or books.
Yeah, right. Okay. Okay, that's super helpful. Okay, then my next to last question, I think, is also those years that you give us those extra pie graphs.
Mm-hmm.
Did you tell us how many students you had those years?
Total student count?
Mm-hmm. Total student count for those particular years, because that would also be interesting to look at. Okay, and then the last question I had was, we had asked you like 20 questions. I'm not seeing it in the packet. I very well could be missing it. It's an extra
An extra packet that looks like this.
Okay. Okay. That'd be great. Thank you. Okay. Thank you for that. Okay. Committee, any more questions just for kind of this piece of the presentation from Chancellor Drott? Yes, Barb. Excuse me, Representative Wassinger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this is kind of out of my field. When you said that KU athletics is completely self-sufficient, is there a percentage that the endowment?
There is through fundraising. So the Williams Fund, which is within endowment, is a fund that donors give to directly to support student athletes and athletics. And that does make up maybe 20% of their budget, 20, 30%. I don't know, Brandon, you might know the answer to that one. I'm not sure, but I think with athletics, it's probably in that range that comes through donations from our donors in direct support of athletics.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, now on to Act 2 of the show, I guess.
Sure. Better part of the show. I'm going to start out by introducing Dr. Robert Mosier, who's our Dean of the School of Medicine Salina campus, and came to KU after a very long and successful career in primary care in Tribune. And so knows the western part of our state very well. He also is founding director of what was called the Heartland Collaborative, and now I think it's just called the CARE Collaborative, which was an innovation grant provided by Medicare to help see if we could change outcomes in rural Kansas. And so I've asked Dr. Mosier if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about the effectiveness of the School of Medicine in Salina, which, if you don't know, is the smallest four-year medical school in America with 8 students per class. Really a unique model that's proven to be very effective. I think you'll hear about that. And then talk about the impact that our efforts with the CARE Collaborative have had on changing outcomes across the state. And then maybe last week could speak to his new job, which he's now the executive director of the newly announced Institute for Rural Healthcare. Did I get that? Kansas Center for Rural Health. There we go. Sorry, I botched it. All right, Dr. Mosier.
Welcome to committee, Dr. Mosier. And then I'll just see if anyone has questions once you're done, if that's okay with you.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay, great. Welcome.
Well, committee, appreciate the opportunity to get before you today. I think this is one committee room I've not been in previously in my past life. So it's great to be here, and also to brag about the KU School of Medicine Salina. Interestingly, this was a program that I was part of a physician workforce work group back in the early 2000s, looking at what could we do to bring more physicians to Kansas to address the underserved populations that we've been dealing with really since we've been in the state, basically. And part of that was to expand the admissions of the School of Medicine, but we couldn't do all of that in Kansas City. So we obviously had already started doing 3rd and 4th year clinical rotations in both Salina and Wichita. And so the recommendation was, why not go ahead and expand into Salina as a 4-year medical school and into Wichita as well, because the students are pretty much used to distance learning. They were mostly doing podcasts and you would attend lectures based on whether they needed help with the concept or not. So the idea was to begin that program in Salina, hopefully recruiting students from a more rural and underserved background. With the hopes that from the data that we knew that's been studied really for quite some time, that those who tend to come from rural or underserved communities tend to choose primary care as their specialty and tend to go back to that type of environment. So we admitted our 11th class here in 2021, 8 students. And out of that 11 classes that we've admitted, we have 90 students to date. You may notice that means we admitted more than 8 one year, which was a year ago last. We admitted 10 because we had 10 who actually chose that campus as where they wanted to do their full 4 years. We would like to eventually be able to expand that out to have 16 students per year, but we have to make certain that we don't overwhelm all of our community providers who there in Salina do such a great job of giving up their time for the education in small groups, but also as clinical instructors. So we have stayed with 8 to 10, and out of that 90 matriculants that we've had, half are women, half are men, so that's great. Over 60% of them come from rural Kansas or rural communities, and over 88% are from Kansas. That's a little bit higher than the main campus in Kansas City, which is closer to 80%. Now, are we serving the mission of graduating students who want to go into primary care in underserved communities? Out of 7 classes that have graduated, which is 54 graduates, 80% of them entered primary care, and 71% finished in primary care. So that means a few of them went on to specialize, which, is great. We need specialists that are also attentive to the needs in rural Kansas as well. But those who have completed practice or their residency training for practice, 80% are in Kansas, and over 40% are in rural Kansas. So we are definitely fulfilling that mission. And one of the things I think so great about, some of the challenges we have as students wanting to come to a small campus is, well, am I going to get the same experience, the same exposure as I would in Kansas City? And indeed they do. Maybe we don't have the bench research in Salina like they do in Kansas City, but we do have opportunities for scholarly activity and a variety of specialties that those students can be exposed to. But all of the graduates that we've had, the residencies that they've selected that they wanted to go into, all of them have been accepted into their specialty of choice. So it may be not a large number, but it's pretty exciting that they are competitive with graduates from other campuses getting what they want. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what Dr. Drod mentioned, having started after I left KDH&E with the University of Kansas Health System in the School of Medicine, was taking a CMS Innovation Award that was developed the Kansas Heart and Stroke Collaborative. My interest in that was knowing not only from my practice, but from my time at KDH&E that we have disparities in rural Kansas for a variety of reasons, but higher mortality rates, higher readmission rates for many of the chronic conditions where they're transferred out into a larger healthcare center and coming back in. And so the Heart and Stroke Collaborative was an opportunity to look at an educational model and a care delivery model that we could work with rural communities to see if we could make a difference on that. So we started out with 13 counties in Northwest Kansas, and we implemented basically an educational model that you'll see on page 21, the graph that has a couple of maps. You can see the 13 counties that we started with, and then where we're at currently. But more importantly, our health improvement model was basically taking evidence-based guidelines and showing that we could put them into practice and they would become the standard of care in a short amount of time. Whereas if you look at the literature, on average, it takes about 11 years for that to occur. So we were able to do that much more effectively. But part of that was not putting the work on the backs of very busy practices and communities that are limited in resource. So we took the education to them. We trained the team at the same time around the protocols that they helped to develop, and we made them applicable to local realities, which oftentimes, how far are you from the nearest heart cath or stroke center? Do you have advanced trauma life support transfers, or are you pretty much all volunteer and basic life support? So we would take the data, collect that for them, and then analyze it and then give them back performance improvement opportunities. And so they took to that. And as you can see with the fact that now we're in over 70 counties and over 78 different entities that have remained part of this, even though we became the Care Collaborative in 2018 because of the end of that original CMS award. We've not lost any of our participants since they've joined us. So I want to show you just quickly, if you like graphs, these always excite me to look at. Well, did it make a difference? And again, this is not me or necessarily the team that is part of the Care Collaborative. It's those folks out in rural practice in the front lines that have done this work, just giving them the information, giving them the tools to work with. So recognizing sepsis and acting on that condition quickly was something we started in late 2015. Didn't know about the COVID pandemic, which was obviously a viral sepsis type condition. But when we started, as we looked at, were they recognizing sepsis, less than 65% of the time did they identify the patient as having sepsis. After going through the training and using a tool for the screening and implementing their protocols, we've seen that over 90% now. And so with that, we've seen a reduction in the mortality from sepsis in the communities that have been engaged in this work. The time to getting a clot-busting drug on board if you're having an MI has a lot to do with the survivability or the chronic morbidity related to that. So we had hospitals that were further than an hour away from a cardiac cath lab ready to identify and administer a lytic. What we found at the beginning, it was taking 54 minutes for that to occur, and we were able to get it pretty close to the 30-minute goal. And then more exciting was the stroke. Less than 3% of eligible stroke patients that should be getting a lytic were getting it in small town practices. Most of it just had to do with the process and the connections with the specialist to administer recommendations. Once we had protocols in place, a process that they were comfortable with, worked for them, we've been able to get that above 20%. Now, you will notice on the graph that the dates end in 2019. You can probably guess why that is. But COVID did kind of interfere with our ability to be out there. But if you look at the page or slide 24, our clinical areas of focus, we obviously started with heart attacks and stroke. We expanded into sepsis, but we also started adding trauma. We'll be adding diabetes here in 2022, heart failure. So a lot of the chronic conditions that are so challenging to treat without the specialists readily available have been a big area of our focus. We've engaged in behavioral health. I'm the PI for HRSA grant that we finished our third year. So we have a sustainable model where we're delivering telebehavioral health to 11 rural communities that are part of our accountable care organization. And we'll be working with Department of Psych in Wichita on developing an application for an opioid response grant. We were very active with Kansas Hospital Association in providing triage protocols for COVID. And obviously that's expanded into the treatment. Early on, it was recommended that, anybody that came to your hospital, you identified with COVID, they could deteriorate so quickly, you needed to move them on to a higher level of care. A lot of folks kind of got lost in the, bend the curve comment. Was really more to do to make sure we didn't overwhelm our healthcare systems. And we unfortunately have had two surges where that's occurred, where these folks had to identify and be able to manage very critically ill patients long enough to be able to get them transferred into. We're able to work with actually a couple of classmates of mine from medical school to help in developing the mission control model that KDH&E made available to hospitals so that they would more quickly be able to use them to identify where a hospital might be that had the capacity to take the patient on. And finally, with creating this Kansas Center for Rural Health, it's basically an opportunity to address what is the School of Medicine's role in addressing healthcare disparities in particularly rural Kansas. And how can we partner with these practices, these communities, some of these disparities that go beyond just clinical services. As we all know, only about 20% of our outcomes have to do with direct clinical services. 70% have to do with the environment we live in. So the Care Collaborative is obviously going to be a big partner to the Center for Rural Health. But the School of Medicine, the Department of Pop Health, with a number of researchers that have been engaged with a lot of health, part of that. And we know that's going to be necessary as we start looking at additional delivery models that are going to be necessary to sustain some type of healthcare in some of our rural communities. With that, I'll stand for any questions if you have any.
Okay, thank you. Committee, Representative Riley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. While you're visiting about some of the different affiliates, can you talk to me a little bit about your Pharmd program and then a little bit about your relationship with the University of Kansas?
I missed the first question about the Pharmd program. I'm not sure how to answer that. The campus in Wichita has the pharmacy school expansion there. When I went through pharmacy school, I had a bachelor's. We didn't have the Pharmd at that time, so I'm not very familiar with that. Dr. Drawd may be able to answer more regarding the Pharmd program there in Wichita and the KU campus. For us, the Care Collaborative, 25% of my salary is paid for by the University of Kansas Health System, which is a separate entity, obviously, from KU Medical Center. And so I serve in that role as a medical director for the Care Collaborative. My job is to help the subject matter experts that are at the KU Health System, which are faculty at the KU School of Medicine, to kind of appreciate the challenges of applying protocols into the rural setting. We don't have a lot of the equipment. We can't afford all of the medications, so we have to identify what's going to be most appropriate.
I guess where I was going with that second question had to do with, what we've seen probably in the last 7 to 8 years of the telemedicine that's gone into the rural communities and how that's progressing out into the rural communities where where those folks have access to the university for some very high level medicine.
Yeah.
So if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, indeed. That was part of our telebehavioral health was taking the connections and being able to deliver behavioral health in a primary care setting where patients were already used to going for their regular health care. The specialists providing that care are staff at the University of Kansas Health System. The other thing that we wanted to do that was different than what they were experiencing in the rural communities, the reason they wanted to be participants was the significant turnover that was occurring around many of the area mental health centers. And so not that they don't have a role in many of the practices to capitalize on that, particularly for the severe and persistent mental illness. Before the bread and butter behavioral health, working on change management for patients dealing with chronic diseases and other issues, having that available within the practice was very good. We're also, the Care Collaborative was part of rolling out some of the funding to make some of the telemedicine platforms available to the practices so they could switch to providing patient care at home when the clinics were kind of shut down and whatnot. And what we kind of found with that is not every community has equal access to broadband capable of managing some of the telemedicine, telehealth services. So that's certainly a challenge in how we address that so that we have equal access to services like that, because I truly do believe down the road, telemedicine, now that we've got much more used to it and can begin to understand how it can be applied to providing care for rural Kansas, I think it'll be
Anything else? I'm sorry, Representative.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Dr. Mosher. Question going back to your program at Salina, you said that you could see a time when you could increase your enrollment to 16, but you don't want to bring too many people into the system and overwhelm the providers that you have. So how big could your enrollment be?
Interesting you bring that up because last week, Assistant Dean and I sat down to look at the clinical rotation for the class that it has 10 students. And as we got to talking, it actually would work nicely if we could go up to 12. 12 would be probably a perfect number. But before we do that, as I said, we don't want to overwhelm our mostly volunteer community physicians that provide access to their patients, their practice for those students to learn their clinical skills. We also have a family medicine residency program there that I'm kind of fond of, having graduated from that. They have 5 residents, and so we also want to make sure that we don't impair the learning experience of those residents. So 12 would be probably the magic number. That would allow us to break the class into 2 groups of 6 so their small group learning could occur at an appropriate level.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So 16 would just be way too many to be in the program.
Yeah, we'd need, for Salina's medical community to probably grow and have a few more in the way of OB-GYN specialists, neurologists, psychiatry, in order to be able to accommodate that big of a class.
Well, I appreciate that because, as we sit back and we get ready to make our recommendations, I want to know kind of exactly where those numbers need to be. So that helps a lot. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Rajas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Mosher, thanks for being here. We have one of those students from Salina in Phillipsburg.
Yes.
So, and I think the communication from the whole process, the community kind of followed his progress. And so he's doing quite well and is I think he may be full, his practice really took off. And so we thank you for that. As long as we get one in my district every year, we'll be okay. I do want to, and I know we have more to go, but just quickly, I have a lot of critical access hospitals in my district, and I think Kansas is has some of the most critical access hospitals in the country as far as from the state goes. It's you're teaching medicine, but there's also, it's different when you're practicing your clinic in a community that has a critical access and that you're in a sense you know that whole thing is at a critical access hospital. Are you able to kind of teach some of those things of how it is different, you know, to bring to rural areas, but even within our critical access hospitals, I know a lot of them everyone operates just a little bit differently.
Yes, it's true. Many of them have rural health clinics attached, and they may be where their provider base, so basically the hospital employs the providers. We have some that where there are independent physician practices in those communities, but we do much better. I can tell you, having gone through pharmacy school, where they kind of expect you when you graduate, you're going to run a pharmacy, you're going to run a business. So having had that kind of business background, if you would, in healthcare prior to medical school, I find that now that we've changed our curriculum, we just finished our 4th year of what we call the ACE curriculum. And with that being modified, we have what we call threads of information, objectives that we try to teach that go through the 4 years. We do a much better job, I think, on population health, public health, and on the healthcare system. Now, that doesn't mean that physicians, as they finish their residency training, are going to feel comfortable around hospital administrators, because there's always a little bit of tug and give there. But I think they do have a better understanding. But it is a complex healthcare system because it's one under-resourced often, remote located often. And so I think it's important that we do continue to improve our education of the students. How do healthcare systems work? How do you get reimbursed for the care you provide? And how do you provide care in limited resource environments? And the students are very interested in that. And obviously, they ask a lot of questions. That's the advantage of the small group. We're able to take the clinical case that we're presenting, and we can give it the rural flavor, if you would, or depending on the provider who's presenting with the students, we can give it a more metropolitan flavor.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it.
Really a great segue into this next segment, which is talking about having real life experience and bringing that into both the educational model, but also the care model. And really, it's an honor today to introduce Dr. Mark Shiflett, who's a Foundation Distinguished Professor in the Department of Chemical and Petroleum Engineering and heads our Institute for Sustainable Engineering. And Dr. Shiflett had a long, very successful career in industry as a researcher, and has brought that to the university and to the state, and is just really tackling some of the biggest challenges really that we face in our country today with his research teams. And he does have multiple teams. So with that, Mark, why don't you take us a different direction and talk a little bit about the work that you're doing?
Welcome to our committee, Dr. Shiflett. We appreciate you coming.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, committee. Well, I thought I would begin on slide 25. And as Chancellor Gerard mentioned, my background is a little different in terms of academics. So I'm a chemical engineer. I started my career at the DuPont company in 1987. And when I joined, the issue was that refrigerants were depleting the Earth's ozone. You may remember the Montreal Protocol was signed. 187 countries agreed to phase out chlorofluorocarbons. And here I am, a 20-year-old chemical engineer, going to get to work on this problem. So over the course of my career, I had 45 patents. One of those patents is on a refrigerant mixture that's used in practically every supermarket in the world, as well as in commercial ice machines and other applications. That particular patent has made the DuPont company over $1 billion. I started teaching part-time at the University of Delaware while I was still at DuPont. And over the course of about 5 years, I just began to fall in love with teaching. So I went to my management in 2016. I had enough years of service and I was old enough that I could actually retire early. And they made it possible for me to leave. And I chose the University of Kansas to set up my research. The DuPont company was very generous. They donated over $2 million in equipment from my lab to the university to help me get started. And my research here is focused on developing sustainable products and processes. And in particular, I was hired to help engage industry to work at the University of Kansas. And I'm also working on, and I'll tell you at the end, a new National Science Foundation Center that'll be focused on refrigerants. So on slide 27, I often get asked, why did you leave industry? And this is a picture why. It's an opportunity to get to train the next generation of engineers and help them get their career started, just like I had mentors when I first started at DuPont that helped me become an engineer. So I thought I would just show you some pictures. On page 28, this is a picture of Mrs. Nicole Montoya. She was an undergraduate at KU, decided to continue with getting her master's degree. This is a picture of her working in her lab. And on the right is a cover of a journal of one of the articles that she published. And what she's working on is the thermal stabilization of vaccines. So what we're doing is trying to develop techniques where you do not have to refrigerate vaccines. You could store them on mesoporous silicas like the picture shown. The pore is large enough for the vaccine to be locked in place so that it doesn't denature if it's heated. And then you can use a mild detergent to release it when it's needed. She's interviewing with Pfizer, and she will be graduating in May. And the next steps with this is to, we submitted a proposal to the National Institute of Health to create a startup company in Kansas. If you go to the next page, this is a picture of Nick Redding. He just received his PhD in November of 2021. He works for the Fight Corporation, so he actually worked while doing his PhD. He's developing novel fire suppression agents. He was very prolific in publishing. He had over 6 publications. And software that he developed while doing his PhD, we are looking at licensing to this industry for how to model these dust explosions. The next page, 30, this is Dr. Ankit Verma. He just graduated in December. He worked with me on some technology that we brought from DuPont on how to recycle the critical metals that are in batteries that will be used in the next generation electric vehicles. This is going to be very important. There just isn't enough critical metal in the world to supply all the batteries that will be needed for electric vehicles one day, so we have to be able to recycle those metals. We filed 2 U.S. patents, so I'm hoping that those will be allowed. And we're looking for an industry partner to actually scale up that technology and license those patents in the future. And Ankit just got a job working for Intel. The next page is Dr. Raj Kaur. He's a research chemist in my group, also an excellent inventor. He has 5 U.S. patents filed. Here we've developed some new alkylation catalysts for making fuels to be cleaner burning. So when you go to the gas station and you look at the octane rating on the pump, that is the amount of alkylate that is in the gasoline to make it more cleaner burning and also more fuel efficient. And we've developed some new catalysts now that we think are better than everything that's currently used in that industry. We believe that DuPont is interested in this, my prior company, and they potentially will be a company that would take this to commercialization. So the last couple slides, I'd like to return to refrigerants. As I mentioned, this is where my career started, and I think this is where my career is going to come to a conclusion. You know, refrigerants are used in many different applications, everything from preservation, comfort, transportation, storage, entertainment, and manufacturing. On the next chart, you may be familiar with the American Innovation and Manufacturing Act. This was passed by Congress and signed by the President in December of 2020. This now calls for the phase down of basically all the refrigerants that we currently use today. So the ones that I developed back in the late 80s and early 90s to replace the chlorofluorocarbons that were depleting the ozone layer, now the concern is global warming. And so over the course of the next 2 decades, we're going to reduce the amount of those refrigerants by 85%. This particular bill is estimated to create 150,000 new jobs and increase manufacturing in the U.S. by $39 billion. And just the refrigerant market alone in the U.S. is worth $2.8 billion. This is a tremendous opportunity for new jobs and industries in Kansas. If you go to the next page, some of this may look very familiar to you. A display case that you may see in a local grocery store, or the air conditioner that sits outside your home. Actually, the refrigerant that's in those systems was one of the things I invented. It's called R410A. It's a mixture of 2 different refrigerants. The one that's highlighted in green, difluoromethane, has a fairly low global warming potential and could be reused if those 2 refrigerants could be separated. When I designed it originally, I designed it so that if it leaked from the system, they would not change composition, which was important for maintaining performance. Now I've got to figure out how to actually separate those refrigerants so that we can reuse one of those components. And if you look on the next page, you'll see what I find to be the more interesting part of refrigeration, which is what's in the back of the store where the sign says employees only. Well, you can go back there. You can take a look real quick and come back out. But there's about 1,000 to 2,500 kilograms of refrigerant in every grocery store. And there's 65,000 grocery stores just in the US. And air conditioners, the one at your home, probably has about 5 to 10 kilograms of refrigerant. And there's over 120 million units in the United States. So there are millions and millions of kilograms of refrigerant that need to be separated, recycled, and repurposed. The group of students that I have working on this are shown on the next page. They are a mix of PhD students and master's degree students. We currently have 4 NSF funded awards that are allowing these students to work on technologies for separating these refrigerants. The first one being developed by Kale and Baca is the closest to commercialization. We plan to create a startup company this year in Kansas called Iconium Engineering Company, and that will be to take that first step in taking that technology out to the industry. On the next chart, I talk about a new refrigerant engineering research center that we want to create here in Kansas. It'll be made up of 6 different universities. KU would be the lead university and would also include Notre Dame, the University of Hawaii, the University of Maryland, Lehigh University, and the University of South Dakota. These National Science Foundation research centers are highly coveted. The funding is $30 million for 5 years. And if successful, it's renewable for 5 more. So the state could get $60 million over the course of 10 years. There's never been a National Science Foundation center focused on refrigerants. We had the director of the National Science Foundation in my lab a couple months ago. He knew about this. He was very excited about us putting this proposal in. The proposal would be submitted at the end of this year. We would work very close with industry. I list just a few companies here. We're planning to have about 30 different companies involved, as well as several different federal agencies. So in summary, I would like to say that we're educating and training the next generation of both graduate and undergraduate chemical engineers to work in industry, attracting top US companies to come conduct research at KU, and creating licensing and startup opportunities in Kansas. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Hey, thank you so much. That is just fascinating, and had no idea that we had this going for us in Kansas. So thank you. Okay, committee questions? Can anyone understand enough to actually ask intelligent questions? I know you all can, I'm teasing, but yeah, Representative Amix, thank you.
Welcome, Dr. Shiblett. The question I guess that I would have is that as we look at these patents that are being filed, are these being filed by the individual? Are these owned by the university? Are they owned by the various students? How does this work?
Yeah, great question. So the students in some cases are inventors on the patent with me, and the patents are owned by the University of Kansas. And then the university has an excellent program for being able to transfer the rights of some of those patents to startup companies in Kansas so that they can then work with industry to commercialize the technology.
So there is a follow the money kind of program that'll happen too. We'll make money. We as a state or we as a university will help fund the program in the future.
Yes. My goal, just like that patent I got for DuPont that made $1 billion, I want to do the exact same thing here in the state of Kansas.
Okay. Yep. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Question. Okay, committee, any other questions? Dr. Shiflett? Okay, thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate that. Chancellor, I since I got this document a little bit later, I know I had just a couple questions about this document, if you don't mind. We just have a few minutes. You'll be off the hook soon. Mike, I'll go ahead and ask the committee if you have any questions too. My question had to do with question number 5, which is what % of your classes are online classes? And Mike, I'm wondering if you could just elaborate a little bit on when someone signs up for an in-person class, that's in person. And then when you say distance education, is that someone who knowingly signs up for an online class? Because of course, in like the fall of 2020, some of what we saw with all schools was you sign up for an in-person class, but it's either hybrid or it's, virtual. So a little bit of explanation about that, your percentages.
Absolutely. So if you look at the in-person category there in 19, 20, and then 21, what you saw was just as you described, about half of it went into a fully online mode and half was hybrid or in person through that first year of 20. And what we really learned through that were a couple things. One is in some areas it actually was more effective to do that for certain kinds of classes and certain kinds of students. And so we actually expanded what we did traditionally, going from about 12% to upwards of 20% now of offerings in distance education, but really predominantly are back to in-person. And we, in many instances, gave the student the option of which they wanted. Some students couldn't make it back. Or didn't want to come back, or had health issues, or were concerned about coming back. So they could enroll in an online option, but it's not a hybrid class, meaning we're teaching the class in person. If you want the online version, it's available, but it's an online version. And so there is some classes we allowed the students to choose. But then really most of those are like degrees that we just offer online, master's degrees of various types being good examples of that. They're just online. We have expanded some of those offerings since we really developed the technology, and through the pandemic, we really now are trying to push that out further.
So just to clarify, like the I guess most recent semester that you have all the statistics, fall of 2021, 80.5% were in person. They intended to be in person, of course. But then the 19.5, were any of those classes intended to be in person, but yet they had to go virtual? Or 19.5% of the students chose to go to virtual school, basically?
None of ours converted in the fall from in-person to online. They either started in person or they started online. We made that pretty clear right up front, and the students had their option to pick, but we really found that it's very disruptive to switch.
It's tough, I know, on everybody.
On everybody, would agree.
Okay, and then I've got to ask this question because I have asked the other universities also, that last question about the appropriate role for parents and taxpayers to be involved in the direction of the university. And, what if the question had said to gain involvement in the culture of the university, or your answer was that you don't have an ideological direction. I mean, of course, you have a culture at KU, and professors have ideological directions. So I think the question was, how was a good way for parents or taxpayers to be involved in what's going on at the university?
No, I think there's multiple pathways that we do already today. So certainly starting at the top with the Board of Regents, they approve our programs and curricula, and they have input on that. And we undergo program review on a regular basis, that every program undergoes a review on a regular basis. So that's sort of the high level piece of it. I would say where we get most of our input is really in our advisory boards. Every school that we have, actually many departments that we have, I would bet your department has an advisory board, not just your school. And those are typically alumni and business leaders who we rely on to tell us what our students need to be learning to be effective when they leave and go out into the workplace. And so getting that feedback on what it is that we're teaching in whatever field it is, and how is that connecting them to what they need to, the skill set that they need to take with them when they go out into the field. We have probably hundreds of those advisory boards. And so for folks who have an interest, always from, and again, they're either industry leaders or alumni for the most part, who just, that's just because who we know, that's who we invite to be on those boards.
And let's say a mom who worked part-time but had 2 students at KU, she might be able to, are there places for someone like that on an advisory board?
It probably most effectively at the school degree level that student is in would be the place to plug in there.
Okay, interesting. Okay, committee, any other questions? We have talked about everything from high-level engineering to athletics. So we've kind of covered the
landscape,
covered the whole thing, and you've answered all the questions. But I think we do have a question, Representative Riley.
Going back around again. So talk to me a little.
So Pharmd Program, as Dr. Mosier mentioned, as many of our degree programs moved from undergraduate degrees to master's degrees to ultimately Pharmd, and that was industry driven. And certainly ours has done that. We have 2 major sites and 2 major sort of academic sites with School of Pharmacy on West Campus in Lawrence, and then another School of Pharmacy that's down in Wichita affiliated with the School of Medicine there. And the same degree is delivered at both places. Those students have to do, much like the medical students and nursing students do, have to do clinical rotations. So they are in pharmacies literally almost every county in the state. We have students rotating out through there to give them that experience, hands-on experience. And then we also have a very active pharmacy practice division at the University of Kansas Health System, where students go over and they and other hospitals as well, but the biggest ones at the health system, where they learn hospital pharmacy, which is evolving very quickly. Hospital pharmacy is now moving out of filling prescriptions in the hospital pharmacy to actually rounding with the teams through the ICU and helping drug management for patients real time. And that's actually kind of exploded and it's really become the new direction for the Pharmd program. No, our enrollments have been pretty solid on the pharmacy program. It's been up and down a little bit in recent years. It actually, interest is back up again, coming out of the pandemic. Interest in everything health professions actually is rebounding, and we're seeing applications back up again. We've been pretty steady in our enrollment at school pharmacy throughout both campuses, Wichita and Kansas City.
Okay, I'm just going to ask one last question, and that is, in the governor's budget, there's $195 million that goes through the Commerce Department. What would you do with your piece of that?
Well, we need a little bit more information on what they're looking for, but in trying to understand what that is and talking with the lieutenant governor, it's transformative type opportunities that universities may have a chance to bring to the table requires matching dollars. So those are big numbers, and which means we got to figure out how to match those numbers as well. And that also would dictate the kind of projects that you could bring to the table. And we think about everything from our cancer research building to a hotel conference center. I mean, it's just, we've got multiple ideas, but we don't have a great understanding yet of what they're looking for.
Very good. Thanks. We didn't even touch deferred maintenance. I'm not going to go there, but
I got an hour.
yeah, exactly. Okay, committee, is there anything else that anyone has? Thank you so much for coming. We
Thank you
really
for having
appreciate it and spending so much time with us. So committee, we're adjourned until tomorrow, and we will have K-State tomorrow.
Thank you all for your time. We have a little treat here for everybody, yes? It's Valentine's Day.
Okay, thank you.